In this lecture, I'm going to give a high-level overview of the process of turning code into a program and go over some general programming terminology. So computers don't understand English or any other human language. They only understand machine code, which is written using the binary system. The binary system uses a series of zeros and ones to represent data and instructions. Unfortunately, humans aren't very good at reading and writing binary. It's possible, but it's difficult and time-consuming. So if humans only understand human languages and computers only understand machine language, then how do we tell computers what we want them to do? The answer is to create a language of code that can be understood by humans, but is also structured in such a way that it can be automatically converted into machine code. So C# and the other languages I listed in the previous lecture are called high-level languages, which means they are designed to be understood by humans. Once you have written code in a high-level language, you can use existing software to convert that code into machine code, which is called a low-level language, meaning it is designed to be understood by computers. So depending on the particular high-level language you are using, this conversion will happen one of two ways. One way is that the code is compiled, meaning the entire code is converted before execution begins. The other way is that the code is interpreted, meaning the code is converted and executed one line at a time. C# is a compiled language. So let's take a look at how that process works. So if you want to write C# code and then execute it as a program, you will need some software tools. First off, you need some way to input the code and be able to save it. So you will need some kind of text editor, like Notepad. Next, you will need a compiler. If there are no syntax errors in your code, meaning your code follows all the rules of that language, the compiler will convert your code into machine code. Specifically, it will convert each source file of code into an object file that contains machine code. Finally, you will need a linker. A linker will connect the compiled object files together into a single executable file that can execute your program. The entire process of converting human-readable code into an executable file is known as building. So in C#, a build consists of the steps of compiling and linking your code. So a text editor, compiler, and linker is the bare minimum you would need, but you're also going to want a debugger, which is used to track down problems in your code, and various other tools that make programming easier. Luckily, you don't have to worry about going out and finding and downloading each of these tools individually, because there are programs out there known as Integrated Development Environments, or IDEs, which combine several software tools into a single application. The most commonly used IDE for C# and many other languages is Visual Studio, and that's the IDE that we will be using in this course. So Visual Studio includes a text editor, compiler, linker, debugger, and many other tools all within one application. Visual Studio's text editor will help you format your code in an organized, readable way, and it will color code the programming code. So different kinds of code will appear in different colors, which also helps to make it more readable to the human eye. Also, Visual Studio can build and execute a program with a single click or key press, so you don't have to perform each step manually, which saves a lot of time when testing your code, especially when you're doing trial and error. Alright, so that covers the process of converting code into a program. Now I'm going to cover some other general programming concepts. One of those concepts is that of libraries. So one of the most useful aspects of code is that it can be reused. There's a way to give a block of code, whether one line or a million lines, there's a way to give a block of code a name, and then be able to execute that entire block of code just by referring to its name. So in that way, you can condense a million lines of code into a single line. And if you didn't write the code yourself, or you had already written it for a different project, you just coded that piece of functionality a million times quicker than it would have taken you otherwise. Alright, so it would be helpful then if you could collect lots and lots of pre-written blocks of code and then use them whenever you can to save you time and effort. So luckily, such collections of pre-written code do exist, and they are called libraries. Libraries are often organized around some specific use. For example, there are libraries dedicated only to code that solves math problems. And then you might have a library that only has code dealing with computer graphics, and so on. So when you find a library you want to use, you can import it into your project and use its code. Alright, so the last term I want to cover in this lecture is framework. Now this one is tricky because framework, in the context of software, is a very vague term. It has no strict definition and can mean different things depending on the specific technology being used. But in general, a framework is a collection of libraries meant to help with general purpose programming. Often, because of the way the code and its libraries work together, a particular framework will encourage a certain methodology to how you develop your applications. The most popular C# framework is .NET, a framework developed by Microsoft. In this course, when we create our projects in Visual Studio, it will automatically include the libraries of the .NET framework in our projects, so they will be ready to use. That being said, because this course focuses on fundamental programming concepts, we won't be using the libraries of the .NET framework very often, but you should be familiar with what it is. Alright, so in this lecture, you got a high-level overview of how code is turned into a program. You also learned some general programming terminology. In the next lecture, I will show you how to download and install Visual Studio, a popular integrated development environment for developing C# programs.